It has defeated more armies than any general, laid the foundations for many of today's racial tensions. It even kick-started the modern environmental movement. And it's not visible to the naked eye.
The malaria parasite and the mosquito that transmits it have probably affected human history more than any other creatures we share the planet with.
From migration to wars, politics to poverty, malaria continues to shape the world in surprising and profound ways. Malaria has shaped the development of some of the world's most powerful institutions and empires. Ancient Rome relied on mosquito-infested marshes to protect it from invaders who often succumbed to malaria. The disease cost Hannibal his right eye, his wife, his son, and much of his army. Without mosquitoes, Rome might have fallen.
In ancient times, malaria was simply called the Roman fever because it was so prevalent in and around Rome. Whether it's the Carthaginians, the Huns, the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Pontine marshes, it essentially acts as a shield, protecting the eternal city.
That's one of the reasons why today so many of us speak languages that are derived from Latin. The Roman Empire was one of the things that helped spread Christianity around Europe and then ultimately the world.
Some humans developed a limited immunity to the disease tens of thousands of years ago, when the first of a series of genetic mutations occurred among farmers in Africa. Thousands of years later, these mutations and the resistance they granted were one reason why the transatlantic slave trade was so horribly profitable. When Africans were shipped to the New World to work on mosquito-infested sugar and tobacco plantations, they were much more likely to survive than indigenous or European indentured labourers who quickly died of malaria. This drove up the price of African slaves and fueled the odious trade in human beings, which in turn shaped the racial contours of both North and South America.
Malaria is one of the main reasons why today a large proportion of the population of the Americas are the descendants of people who were brought there involuntarily.
We have to remember America went through a civil war, essentially partly due to slavery. And obviously, the repercussion of that we're still living with today in the United States, no question.
Today, Africa carries the heaviest burden of malaria. The disease still kills around 400,000 people a year. Most are children under 5. And the vast majority of all deaths occur in Africa, where the disease continues to perpetuate poverty.
By one estimate, malaria and tropical diseases like it knock a whole percentage point off economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa every year.
But the death toll has fallen rapidly in the past 2 decades, thanks to drugs and insecticide-coated bed nets. And some African countries have done especially well. Senegal is one of the success stories. The rate of infection is only a fifth of what it was 20 years ago, and below the average for sub-Saharan Africa. The country hopes to be malaria-free by 2030.
We need to show that there is possibility in Africa to go to 0 cases.
Part of the secret of Senegal's success is cutting-edge genomics. Scientists here study the parasite's DNA to track how the disease is evolving and identify mutations that might indicate drug resistance.
The role of the genomics is to support for decision making. If a drug is not working sometimes, it's because there is mutation in specific genes. The genomics work will help us to identify these.
This helps policymakers keep one step ahead of the parasite, which has already developed resistance to a host of drugs. The first effective cure for malaria was found around 400 years ago in the bark of the cinchona tree in the Andes. Jesuit priests brought it back to Europe, but kept its origins secret. For years, they curried favor with the rich and powerful by curing them of malaria. Control of this wonder drug made the Catholic Church more influential. Fast forward to the Second World War, and cinchona bark had been refined into quinine. and the Axis powers, Germany and Japan, had seized most of the world's supply, which gave the Japanese a big advantage in tropical battles.
When the Americans surrendered on the island of Bataan, 85% of their army had malaria.
Of our 36,000 troops left in the last days of Bataan, 20,000 were out on their feet or down with malaria.
This is your enemy. Remember her.
The New York Times said that they lost not for want of ammunition, but for want of malaria pills.
Without quinine, the Allies were forced to rely on other pills with nasty side effects and an awareness campaign about the dangers of being bitten.
The female Anopheles mosquito, who hides where she can't be seen.
Aided by pamphlets drawn by American soldier Theodore Geisel, later known as Dr. Zeus.
Some of them are very sassy, if you will, using Anopheles mosquito as a seductress sex worker, if you will, who preys on unprotected GIs. So it was a multi-front war against malaria.
Walt Disney used characters from this playful classic to spread the message.
Attaboy, Dopey, spray all the dark corners and under things.
After the war, governments tried to end malaria by wiping out mosquitoes. They used a new pesticide that some called the atomic bomb of the insect world. It saved millions of human lives.
And it is a miraculous mosquito killer. For everything else it does, malaria rates during the 1950s are reduced by 90% in numerous areas across the globe.
But it also had side effects. DDT lasted a long time and entered the food chain, possibly causing cancer. The overuse of DDT inspired Rachel Carson to write Silent Spring, the book that kick-started the modern green movement. In it, she warned of the dangers of slathering the planet with pesticides without understanding their long-term effects. Widespread use of DDT was stopped in the 1970s. Today, scientists are working on different ways to control the disease, such as sequencing the genomes of the parasite. In this lab in Cambridge in England, scientists would normally be looking for mutations in the parasite's DNA, but today they're using their experience to sequence COVID-19.
It became clear that the world was going to need sequencing capacity to try to answer some basic questions about the virus, where it was coming from, how it was spreading, and ultimately whether it was going to be sensitive to vaccines. And so it was a no-brainer that we need to contribute to that effort.
They hope the increased public awareness of disease control brought about by the pandemic might also help in the fight against malaria.
COVID has alerted everyone to the challenges of tackling an epidemic and also to the need for accurate surveillance information. That is going to help, I think, feed into the way we deal with other diseases.
Researchers recently estimated that malaria could be eliminated within a generation if an additional $2.7 billion a year was spent on prevention. But with the COVID-19 pandemic far from over, raising this extra cash could be hard. So it's still too early to say how long malaria will continue to shape the world.
I'm Robert Guest. I'm the foreign editor of The Economist. If you want to read some of our coverage of how malaria has shaped human history, please click this link. And please don't forget to subscribe.